store and they said, "Yeah, that's bogus." I know. They're using an 800 number. Good afternoon. It's 1 o'clock and time for the St. John Daily Word. I'm Pastor Ron Genaro. Today is our Bible study edition, and we welcome you. And we're going to have numerous announcements today that I'm going to make you aware of, but it's all things that are happening in the next several days and weeks. Ash Wednesday is tomorrow. We have two services, one at noon, one at 7. We will not be live streaming this service, so you will need to attend in order to receive ashes either on your forehead or on the back of your hand. We have a full service set. It should be about 45 minutes or so with the service, and the choir will be participating in the 7 o'clock service, and we'll have special music in the noon service. Daylight savings time begins this Sunday, March 9th. And what that means, and we failed to know that, we forgot to announce that on Sunday, is that this is the Sunday I loathe. And that is spring forward, meaning you lose an hour's sleep. I'm in trouble. I always go to bed at 10 o'clock on Saturday night. This means 9 o'clock, and I don't think I've done that since I was 8 years old. And you don't want to wake up at 2 in the morning and switch your clocks, but that's officially when you go to daylight savings time. I thought the government wanted to get rid of this and make it always daylight savings time, which would not be bad for us down here for the afternoons, but in the morning it's terrible when you have kids going to school. Not that I have any kids going to school anymore. So, but anyway, so please be sure to check your clocks and to make sure you put them forward Saturday night before you go to bed, because invariably there's always someone when we're walking out of service walking in. It's not so bad if you're doing that at 7:45. It's when you're coming at 9:30 and you think it's 9:30 and it's actually 10:30 and we're all leaving. We did have somebody come this past Sunday who said, "I thought your service was at 9. No, it's at 9:30. Well, we thought we read it was 9. I said, "It's on all the signage. It's on our website, 9:30. What am I going to do for half an hour?" I said, "Well, the church is half full right now." So grab some coffee, get a cookie or a muffin, and go on in. I think they ate all of the snickerdoodles on me too. So they were all gone at the end of service. Walked out there. All the snickerdoodle cookies and cupcakes were all gone. It was sadness. Spaghetti dinner tickets are available. They will be available this week. Next Tuesday, March 11th, at 4 o'clock, 5 o'clock, and 6 o'clock are the seatings for dine-in, also for takeout. But there are no dine-in tickets left for 5 o'clock. They were gone a week or so ago. They're $13 each, or 2 for $25. They'll be available in the narthex this Sunday, or you can stop by the church office up through Thursday of this week to purchase tickets. Silver sneakers every Tuesday and Thursday, but not next Tuesday because of spaghetti dinner. And every Tuesday and Thursday, 11 a.m. in the fellowship hall, and there is a process of registering so that the Y can get reimbursed from Silver Sneakers. And so we encourage you to come and be a part of that. And right now it's about 30 people. I don't know how many were there today. 17 today. They were down. They thought it was spaghetti dinner, I guess. New folks came today. All right. Bible study every Tuesday except next Tuesday because of spaghetti dinner and because our son and his fiancée are flying in Tuesday afternoon in Tampa. So pray for me. I'll be driving to Tampa and not having spaghetti dinner. I usually fast all day and then eat my spaghetti. Originally, spaghetti dinner was going to be today, but we had to move the date. They've actually moved it 3 times. Before anyone knew about it, and before it was all announced to the public, there were some different things going on. And I can just imagine the sauce and the noodles. And I'll be missing those. I'll be watching a sunset in Tampa Bay with our son. Treasure Trove sale will return in March of 2026. You would not believe all the phone calls we've been receiving from members of the church and outside. They are taking a fallow year to just rest. We are making some changes. We've already purchased a new trailer and then sold the old trailers, which were kind of small and not really up to what we needed. And God has blessed us with that. We found a really good deal on a gently, and I mean gently, used trailer. Someone bought it, had it a week, and returned it, and it was brought down here. That's my understanding of it. At least that's my story, and I'm sticking to it. Parkway Food Ministries, we support that. Items in need are non-perishables, canned goods, peanut butter, cereal, just put them in the box. We decided not to do something special with them during Lent because we support them year-round. We've got something else we're doing for Lent, and I'll talk about that after we're done with all the announcements. SPRC will be meeting tonight at 7 p.m. That's a hybrid meeting. All of the members have received a Zoom invitation. A number of them are coming here to the education building where we will meet, but we will also have folks able to Zoom in. I know one or two are going to be doing it via Zoom. Lenten services every Wednesday from March 12th, that's a week from tomorrow, through April 9th, we will have a Lenten service, a noontime service. I will only preach one of those. I'll be preaching the April 9th one. Several of our pastors who are part of this congregation, some are on staff, some are not, but they will be preaching. There's going to be 2 hymns, an opening hymn, a closing hymn, an opening prayer, a closing prayer, no bulletins, no frills. We're just going to have a service, and the pastors will preach somewhere between 15 and 20 minutes or so. And it's all on aspects that are what we're calling the 3 pillars of Lent: fasting, prayer, and almsgiving. And so we're doing that, and then also the Lenten services on the Sunday services will also highlight some of those features as well. Ladies First Friday Fellowship will be this Friday, March 7th at 10 a.m. in the Fellowship Hall. This is open to all the ladies and their friends. And my wife has been telling me to tell you, if you have been wondering whether you should come this Friday. They have something set up that is going to be, what I understand, hilarious and a lot of fun. So the ladies need to come and be a part of that. I won't be there. I have a previous engagement visiting Mr. Green's with some of our members. I'll be playing golf with some of our members, but they're going to take some pictures and video and let me see some of it. Charity Crafters also meets Friday, March 7th at 12:30 in the Fellowship Hall. All crafty and non-crafty folks are welcome. They are making various crafts. They do. I don't know if they do a different one each week, or each time they meet, but they do a lot of things, and then those are going to be donated away to other groups. That's why it's called Charity Crafters. Fellowship dinner will also be this Friday. That's twice a month, the first and the third Friday of the month. And that's at 5:30 in the Fellowship Hall, $5 per person. What I understand is that it's going to be hot dogs, good hot dogs, I hope and pray, and they will be. But hot dogs, and then you need to bring a dish to pass. They're going to provide the hot dogs, the buns, and the condiments, and then there'll be some sort of program or something to do. We also want to let you know about Highlands Ridge Corral. They have a concert Sunday, March 16th. At 4 p.m. here at St. John with free admission. There will be a free will offering taken. Faith and Fellowship with Pastor Dorman meets on Wednesdays at 11 a.m. And that will meet as long as Pastor Dorman is here. He will be taking some time off and traveling this summer, but they will be meeting during the Lenten season as well. And then Theology 101 has just a few weeks left, and we're working on something else to offer as well. And I'll be talking to the Sunday school class possibly this Sunday to see if they are interested in that, or we'll offer a different Sunday school, another Sunday school in another room. Those are all my announcements. Almost 10 minutes. We're going to begin with a word of prayer, and then we will turn to Genesis chapter 37. Let us pray. Gracious God, we thank you and we praise you, and we ask that you would be with us in everything we say and do today. May you speak to us and through us, we ask, in the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Amen. And I misspoke. We actually finished chapter 37. We are in chapter 38. But I've got to highlight and recount what happened in chapter 37. Jealousy reared its head. Israel's sons, right, Jacob's sons, really couldn't stand one of their younger brothers. Not their youngest brother, one of their younger brothers, which was Joseph. Joseph became an interpreter of dreams, and he had interpreted his own dreams. And in his dreams, and I want you to understand this, you need to file that away, that he has that ability, because that will come up later on in his life. But what happens is he dreams that they are doing the harvest, and they are harvesting, and the sheaves are bowing down to him, and all of his brother's sheaves, and they don't like that. File that away. It's going to come back also. And that his mother and his father. Now, at this point, when he's having this, his mother has died. His youngest brother is Benjamin, or Benjamin, which means son of my right hand. And that's what Jacob names him. And so Joseph is not endeared to his brothers because they think he's a smart aleck and that he is arrogant, because his dreams and his interpretations are that one day he's going to rule over them. That's one thing. Anybody want to remember and shout out what the second thing was? Every time his brothers were doing something wrong, Joseph tattled on them to their father. Now, at this point, his older brothers are in their 30s and 20s, or 20s, 30s, and 40s. He's 18, and he's still ratting them out. And so he goes, his father sends him to check on his older brothers. They're supposed to be in Shechem. They're not there. They're in another place, and they see him coming. Oh, and by the way, he's got his coat that is fancy. We don't know whether it is really the coat of many colors. It's called that. It's also called the coat with sleeves. And another translation, it says he has pockets. If you can imagine this, pockets was an innovation. And if I can remember correctly, now Joyce, you'll have to correct me, but I remember my mother loathing making pockets when she would make clothing, because they were really hard to get them so that they sat right and stuff. Am I right on that? Like, I remember her cursing under her breath and then pulling it out and redoing, because you got to do the stitches right in order for it to lay down, otherwise it puffs out and all of that stuff. That's all I remember. That and my mom not being happy with me because I was so skinny that we had to go to a special place to buy my pants, because they were only place where they sold slims. And I don't have that problem now, but I did when I was a kid. I actually had one of my aunts pay me $1 for every pound I put on. She died many years ago, so I never could collect in my adulthood, but Aunt Margaret, I haven't thought of her in years. So what happens is they take Joseph, put him in a cistern, right? A hole in the ground, but it's a cistern. It collects water, and it's dry. It's not rainy season. They put him down there because they're trying to decide. They're arguing. And the oldest wants to say, okay, let's put him down here, and his plan is to go and free him. They wanted to kill him. And Reuben wanted to free him. He's the oldest son. And so Reuben goes back to the pit, saw that Joseph's not in the pit. He tore his clothing, which meant he's mourning him. So then they take his coat, his robe, and they dip it in blood. They kill an animal. They dip it in blood. They take it back. And this takes nerve. or as my grandmother would have said, gall. They show it to their father and say, is this Joseph's? They know darn well it's Joseph's. They took it off of Joseph. But Dad, we found this. We didn't find any body parts. We just found this. It's dipped in the blood. I mean, it's bloody. Could this be Joseph's? I just remember when my children wanted to tell stories about each other or do something, and not too much, but some of those things happened, and but that's what they're doing. So we have this happen, but what had happened also is they had sold him to a caravan, and then that caravan had sold him to the Midianites. Meanwhile, the Midianites had sold him in Egypt to Potiphar, one of Pharaoh's officials, the captain of the guard. Now, we leave Joseph's story briefly, but we're going to come back to that. We may or may not get to it today because of all the announcements. And we have this other story about Judah. It's a horrible story, but it is what happened. It happened at that time that Judah went down from his brothers and settled near a certain Adullamite whose name was Hirah. There Judah saw the daughter of a certain Canaanite whose name was Shua. He married her and went into her, meaning he had physical relations with her. She conceived and bore a son, and he named him I love that. Hey, get over here. Judah's firstborn. Okay. She was in Chezib when she bore him. Judah took a wife for his firstborn. Her name was Tamar. So what we have here is this story about Judah that takes years, but it's setting it up. So what you have is Judah marrying a woman he probably shouldn't have married, but he marries her. They have a child, and his son's name is And then grows, and then somewhere along the line, is married off to Tamar, who again she conceived and bore a son whom she named Onan. I just love it when we talk about sex. We're going to be talking about it a lot in this chapter. I'm so sorry. If I turn as red as the stripe in my shirt, you'll understand why then. Yet again, she bore a son, and she named him Shelah. She was in Chezib when she bore him. Judah took a wife for his firstborn. Her name was Tamar. But Judah's firstborn, was wicked in the sight of the Lord, and the Lord put him to death. Then Judah said to Onan, "Go into your brother's wife and perform the duty of a brother-in-law to her. Raise up offspring for your brother." This was the practice. If you had 2, 3 sons, your oldest son marries, and he dies before they have conceived children, then the next eldest son would marry the woman, but if they had male children, they would not be considered his child. They would be considered the first husband's child. This happens here. We see it elsewhere. It also will extend later on in the story of Ruth. You have, in the story of Ruth, which is really the story of Naomi and Ruth, Ruth winds up marrying Boaz, who is a distant relation, but there is one other person who is closer. And at that point, there's no siblings, but there's other male has the right to marry her. And the one who's closer doesn't, and he gives her, I love this, he gives her his sandals, and that's the bill of divorcement. Those of you who've been married and divorced, if you'd have just gotten off for the price of a pair of shoes, you probably would have been happy, to give them away. It wasn't community property then. Women had no rights, but that's how you sent a woman away. You gave her shoes and sent her out. And what also occurs later on in the time of Jesus, a man could divorce his wife for any reason. She burned the bread. Here you go. Here's your sandals. Get going. Not good. But that's how it worked at that time. So Onan has to marry Tamar. But since Onan knew that the offspring would not be his, he spilled his semen on the ground whenever he went in to his brother's wife, so that he would not give offspring to his brother. What he did was displeasing in the sight of the Lord, and he put him to death also. Then Judah said to his daughter-in-law Tamar, "Remain a widow in your father's house until my son Shelah grows up." For he feared that he too would die like his brothers. So Tamar went to live in her father's house. Now at this point, you're thinking, maybe Judah's thinking she's a widowmaker. Right? She is the black widow. My first son marries her, he dies. Then the second one marries her and he dies. Because what does every parent want to see in their child? Well, it's not just grandchildren, but they want to see the best. So in a sense, Judah is protecting his third son and sending her back. And Tamar, this is not going to sit right with her. She's going to be upset by this because she has rights. Not many, but she has some rights. And some of those rights are she has the right to have children. In course of time, the wife of Judah, Shunah's daughter, died. When Judah's time of mourning was over, he went up to Timnah to his sheep shearers, he and his friend Hira the Adullamite. When Tamar was told, "Your father-in-law is going up to Timnah to shear his sheep," she put off her widow's garments, put on a veil, wrapped herself up, and sat down at the entrance to Enam, which is on the road to Timnah. She saw that Shelah was grown up, yet she had not been given to him in marriage. When Judah saw her, he thought her to be a prostitute. Why did he think she was a prostitute? Because she was where the prostitutes sat, and she was dressed like a prostitute. And she had a veil. So he didn't know that it was his daughter-in-law twice over, and was to be thrice over. And what's the important part here? What also do we know? Judah's wife had died. So he is a widower and possibly frustrated by that fact. So when Judah saw her, he thought her to be a prostitute, for she had covered her face. He went over to her at the roadside and said, "Come, let me come into you," for he did not know that she was his daughter-in-law. She said, "What will you give me that you may come into me?" He answered, "I will send you a kid from the flock." And she said, "Only if you give me a pledge until you send it." He said, "What pledge shall I give you?" She replied, "Your signet and your cord and the staff that is in your hand." I need something. She is smart. I need something to prove to me that you're going to send me the kid when it's born, the offspring. She's got another plan. She's talking about an offspring, but not the offspring that you thought. Exactly. Well, it is a kid. It's just a different kind of kid. So he gave them to her and went into her, and she conceived by him. Then she got up and went away, and taking off her veil, she put on the garments of her widowhood. When Judah sent the kid by his friend the Adullamite to recover the pledge from the woman, he could not find her because she wasn't there. She had left. He asked the townspeople, "Where is the temple prostitute who was at Enam by the wayside?" But they said, "No prostitute has been here. We run them off. We don't have them here in our town." So he returned to Judah and said, "I have not found her." Moreover, the townspeople said, "No prostitute has been here." Judah replied, "Let her keep the things as her own, otherwise we will be laughed at. You see, I sent this kid and you could not find her." About 3 months later, Judah was told, "Your daughter-in-law Tamar has played the whore. Moreover, she is pregnant as a result of whoredom." And Judah said, "Bring her out and let her be burned." He has righteous indignation. Let's set her straight. As she was being brought out, she sent word to her father-in-law. "It was the owner of these who made me pregnant." And she said, "Take note, please, whose these are, the signet and the cord and the staff." Then Judah acknowledged them and said, "She is more in the right than I, since I did not give her to my son Shelah, and he did not lie with her again." Now, I want to stop there. So, in a sense, Judah's going to be a father again and a grandfather all at once. This is like that song, "I am my father." Yeah, I'm my own grandpa. Yeah. Then the time of her delivery came. There were twins in her womb. While she was in labor, one put out a hand, and the midwife took and bound on his hand a crimson thread, saying, "This one came out first." But just then he drew back his hand, and out came his brother, and she said, "What a breach you have made for yourself." Therefore he was named Perez. Afterward his brother came out with the crimson thread on his hand, and he was named Zerah. Any questions about this awful story? And I'm just going to tell you, this is an awful story. We have seen incestuous relationships before, though, right? Lot and his two daughters. This is where we say, this is a horrible story. We can't imagine this. And yet we write novels about this kind of stuff. And we have all kinds of literature written like this. There's some sort of perverse fascination with it. But then the other thing is, the Bible does not shy away from some things that we go, wait a minute, that's wild, that's terrible. It doesn't shy away. It still interacts with it, and we see that.
I read in one of my books that there were two different kinds of prostitutes in that time also.
Yes.
There were temple prostitutes.
Yes.
And then they were paid by donations.
Right. The question is, there were two types of prostitutes. There are temple prostitutes and then a common type of prostitute.
Got their own
Up front, they negotiated, but the temple prostitute, it was done through, and it was part of the religious worship experience. The Greeks had that, the Romans had that, and even the Canaanites had that. They were temple prostitutes.
I thought it was strange when it was called temple prostitute.
Well, he thought that she was employed by the community. And, there have been times, even in American history, where there was licensed prostitution. There is in some areas of Nevada. There was the red light district in New Orleans. And then when Janine and I were on our trip to South Dakota, we went to Deadwood. And there is actually a prostitution tour you can take. And I looked at Janine, she said, "No way." And I was like, I don't want it either. But there was a prostitution ring that was working until, I think they said it was the 1990s. And then the IRS and the FBI raided it and shut it down. But it was common knowledge in the community, and there were connected rooms in the down. That's the tour. You tour some of these historic buildings that are all connected, and they look like separate buildings, but there are tunnels to it. And so you go through all of that, and it was so people could escape and all that. Well, what they did is they bottled it all up and arrested. And apparently it was quite embarrassing for local figures when that all occurred. All right, so we have that sex story. And we got another one right after it. Okay? Or almost. Now Joseph, All right, so we go back to Joseph, chapter 39. But we have this story about Judah too, and Judah is, I think he's the fourth son, and he is different. And Judah will become one of the dominant tribes. And in fact, that's why we call Jewish people Jews, because of Judah. And that's why they're called Jewish, is because of Judah, because that becomes the largest tribe. And they're called Jews during the Babylonian captivity. All right, so chapter 39. So we will get to the story of Joseph. I went through that faster. We didn't have any questions. I'm glad. Did I turn red? I hope not. Now Joseph was taken down to Egypt, and Potiphar, an officer of Pharaoh, the captain of the guard, and the Egyptian, brought him from the Ishmaelites who had brought him down there. The Lord was with Joseph, and he became a successful man. He was in the house of his Egyptian master. His master saw that the Lord was with him, and that the Lord caused all that he did to prosper in his hands. Now, Potiphar doesn't know the Lord. He's an Egyptian, so he's not a worshiper of Yahweh, but he just recognizes the giftedness of this young man who's 18. He's a kid. Even by those standards of that time, he's a young man. And so Potiphar trusts him more and more and grows to appreciate him, right? I would even dare say he loves Joseph, and I'm going to tell you how that manifests itself in the rest of the story. So Joseph found favor in his sight and attended him. He made him overseer of his house and put him in charge of all that he had. From the time that he made him overseer in his house and over all that he had, the Lord blessed the Egyptian's house for Joseph's sake. The blessing of the Lord was on all that he had in house and field. Now, can you remember another story about Egypt with another character in the book of Genesis, where it was the opposite, where God cursed everything in the Egyptian's home? It's the story of Abraham and Sarah. Because Abraham says, Sarah is my sister, doesn't claim she's his wife. Why? Twice. He does it twice. And both times, Pharaoh and then the other king take her into their harem. They don't sleep with her. And ladies, she's in her 70s and 80s when this stuff happens. Okay, just so you know. But she's gorgeous. And God punishes. It's so much so that they call Abraham and said, is she your sister for real or is something else? Well, she's my sister, but she's my wife. Take her, because difficulties come. Judgment comes. Not on Abraham. And in fact, Pharaoh says, here, take this as recompense for what you... But he's mad. He's like, you did this to me, but I want this curse to go away. So this is the opposite. Everything's coming up roses for Potiphar because he's got Joseph there. God is blessing. Now you're going to see what happens. From that time on, made her overseer of his house, and all that he had, the Lord blessed. All right, verse 5. So verse 6. So he left all that he had in Joseph's charge, and with him there he had no concern for anything but the food that he ate. Now Joseph was handsome and good looking. That's what the text says. He was handsome and good looking. That's both of those adjectives. Right? He's handsome and good looking. And after a time, his master's wife cast her eyes on Joseph and said, lie with me. But he refused and said to his master's wife, look, with me here, my master has no concern about anything in the house, and he has put everything that he has in my hand. He is not greater in this house than I am, nor has he kept back anything from me except yourself, because you are his wife. How then could I do this great wickedness and sin against God? Joseph's pure. Mrs. Potiphar, we don't know her name, she's after him. Now, in the 80s, 1980s, there was a series of movies that were made, Hollywood-made Bible movies. Would you like to know who played Mrs. Potiphar? No. Elizabeth Taylor played Sarah in the movie The Bible. John Huston's The Bible. Raquel Welch was not it. Do you remember Dynasty? No, not Linda. Joan. Joan Collins played Potiphar. Mrs. Potiphar. Yeah, she was like she cast her eyes on whoever was playing Joseph and said, "Come with me." And he said, "Uh-uh." I always thought that was funny. Talk about typecasting, right? Because I never watched Dynasty. I just knew that people watched that, but she played a temptress in that too. No. Oh, I can't remember. I don't remember. I'd have to look it up. So, how could I do this great wickedness and sin against him? That's verse 9. Verse 10. And although she spoke to Joseph day after day, he would not consent to lie beside her or to be with her. So it's not just she's throwing himself at him for this one time. It's every day. She is tempting him right and left, or attempting. One day, however, when he went into the house to do his work, and while no one else was in the house, she caught hold of his garment, saying, "Lie with me." But he left his garment in her hand and fled and ran outside. So he stepped out of his clothes and ran away. That's not going to go well. But he left his garment in his hand and fled outside. When she saw that he had left his garment in her hand and had fled outside, she called out to the members of her household and said to them, "See, my husband has brought among us a Hebrew to insult us. He came into me to lie with me, and I cried out with a loud voice. And when he heard me raise my voice and cry out, he left his garment beside me and fled outside." So she's crying rape. Mostly because she is angry because she couldn't seduce him and tempt him. So he runs. She's got evidence. She's embarrassed, and she's probably thinking, well, they're going to see him outside without his cloak. And we don't know if he had undergarments or if he was naked, but he ran, leaving that, and she says, "Oh, he tried to do this to me." So she may be embarrassed. Certainly she's angry, and she's now embarrassed. Now, what can you imagine the punishment was for a slave for doing this in Egypt? Death. No questions. No questions asked. Put him to death. This is how we know Potiphar cares for Joseph. Plus, we also understand that Joseph is protected by God. Then she kept his garment by her until his master came home. And she told him the same story, saying, "The Hebrew servant whom you have brought among us came in to me to insult me. But as soon as I raised my voice and cried out, he left his garment beside me and fled outside." When his master heard the words that his wife spoke to him, saying, "This is the way your servant treated me," he became enraged. Now, who do you think he's enraged with? It doesn't say. But I have a suspicion it is not necessarily with Joseph. Probably because he knew his wife.
And he didn't kill him right away.
And he doesn't kill him.
No, I know.
Yeah.
He put him in jail.
And Joseph's master took him and put him into the prison, the place where the king's prisoners were confined. He remained there in prison. That's how I know Potiphar doesn't believe his wife. But he's got to do something, because after all, she is his wife. So he takes Joseph, puts him in the prison, and then forgets about him and leaves him there. But the Lord was with Joseph and showed him steadfast love. He gave him favor in the sight of the chief jailer. The chief jailer committed to Joseph's care all the prisoners who were in the prison, and whatever was done there, he was the one who did it. The chief jailer paid no heed to anything that was in Joseph's care, because the Lord was with him, and whatever he did, the Lord made it prosper. So, Joseph has prospered in Potiphar's home and now in the prison. He's the chief trustee, if you will, put it in modern terms. He's running the place. Because what happens? Everything he touches, everything he does, God blesses it and prospers him. Why do you think that is? Because he's chosen by God to do that. That's it. And because for whatever faults Joseph has, and he's got some too, the tattletaling's not great, but yet he's earnest, he's honest, he wants to do it right. He honors his father, he honors his mother. He's just too honest, and he tells them what the dreams mean, which is actually insulting to his father and mother a little bit. Wow, we're moving today. We're going to get another chapter. I don't think we'll get two. Sometime after this, the cupbearer of the king of Egypt and his baker offended their lord, the king of Egypt. All right, so you got the baker. Now, the baker is somebody, they bake bread, but you've got to understand that bread is a staple. The Hebrew word for bread is lahem. We would write it in English, L-A-H-E-M, lahem. All right? Can you tell me what the word is for food? That's the word for bread. What's the word for food? That's a trick question. It's lahem. It's the same word, because bread is a staple. And so it tends to then be used as a generic term for what you eat, because you had to eat bread. You ate bread every day. You ate bread at every meal. In the time of Jesus, you earned 1 shekel a day because that was the price of a loaf of bread. And if you had a loaf of bread, you could feed yourself and your family. Okay? So it's food. So you have the baker. Cupbearer. So he carries his cup whenever you want something to drink, right? That is what he does. He's the taster. He tastes whatever the king drinks. Why? Because even back then, people didn't like kings, and they would poison them. And so he tastes it. Well, he lived. Give me the cup. You hope he's not sick. Why are you sniffling? Don't you taste my drink today. Get your assistant cupbearer. So Pharaoh got angry with them, the chief cupbearer and the chief baker, and he put them in custody in the house of the captain of the guard, in the prison where Joseph was confined. The captain of the guard charged Joseph with them, and he waited on them, and they continued for some time in custody. One night they both dreamed. The cupbearer and the baker of the king of Egypt, who were confined in the prison, each his own dream, and each dream with its own meaning. When Joseph came to them in the morning, he saw that they were troubled. So he asked Pharaoh's officers who were with him in custody in his master's house, "Why are your faces downcast today? Why are you down in the mouth? Why do you feel so bad? Why do you look like you haven't slept in a week?" All right? And Joseph said to them, why are your faces downcast today? Verse 8, they said to him, "We have had dreams, and there is no one to interpret them." which in the ancient world, and even still today, people dream things and people want them interpreted. I think I saw a commercial or something. The wife had a dream. Yeah, there's one, it's selling insurance. I had a dream that something happened to you. We had a car accident and you were killed and we had nothing. So we need to buy this insurance. It's like, oh, geez. I half expected the lady to go, whack. Joseph said to them, do not interpretations belong to God? Please tell them to me. Tell me what your dream is. So the chief cupbearer told his dream to Joseph and said to him, in my dream there was a vine before me, and on the vine there were 3 branches, and as soon as it budded, its blossoms came out, and the clusters ripened into grapes. Pharaoh's cup was in my hand, and I took the grapes and pressed them into Pharaoh's cup and placed the cup in Pharaoh's hand. Simple enough dream. That's work. That's a work dream. Isn't it? Sometimes what we do will affect us. I remember when I was 18, I got a job in a bank. And I was a bank teller. And I did that for a couple years before I went off to college. And did some other things, part of the bank with the training. But I went to work at a bank where you had, some of you, this really show how old I am and when I was working. That bank had what was called a 10-key adding machine. Anybody remember what a 10-key adding machine is? It doesn't mean it just has 10 keys. There are 10 columns. And you hit it, and then you hit with the heel of your hand this thing, and it does the adding. Like you hit the add key, and then you hit that, and it gives you a total. I had a callus on this hand, and I remember one time dreaming that I was working, and I woke up going like this and hitting my pillow. I was having a work dream. Then Joseph said to him, this is its interpretation. The 3 branches are 3 days. Within 3 days, Pharaoh will lift up your head and restore you to your office, and you shall place Pharaoh's cup in his hand, just as you used to do when you were his cupbearer. But remember me when it is well with you. Please do me the kindness to make mention of me to Pharaoh, and so get me out of this place. For in fact, I was stolen out of the land of the Hebrews, and here also I have done nothing that they should have put me into the dungeon, because I never assaulted Mrs. Potiphar, right? And I never should have been plucked up out of that pit and sold into slavery. Those nasty Midianite and Ishmaelites, leaving out the fact that it was his brothers who threw him into the pit, and they negotiated the deal for 20 pieces of silver. So he tells them a good interpretation, right, to the cupbearer. On the 3rd day, when the chief baker saw that the interpretation was favorable, he said to Joseph, I also had a dream. There were 3 cake baskets on my head, and in the uppermost basket there were all sorts of baked food for Pharaoh, but the birds were eating it out of the basket on my head. And Joseph answered, this is the interpretation. The 3 baskets are 3 days. Are you noticing that there's the same interpretation? He's got a formula. 3 baskets, 3 days. Within 3 days, Pharaoh will lift up your head from you and will hang you on a pole, and the birds will eat the flesh from you. Yeah, get everything in order. Because baker, you are not rising. The flour is not rising. You are going to be a goner. On the 3rd day, which was Pharaoh's birthday, he made a feast for all his servants and lifted up the head of the chief cupbearer and the head of the chief baker among his servants. He restored the chief cupbearer to his cupbearing, and he placed the cup in Pharaoh's hand. But the chief baker he hanged, just as Joseph had interpreted to him. And yet the chief cupbearer did not remember Joseph, but forgot him. Why? He just did. He was too busy. And it wasn't God's timing yet. Well, it just wasn't in God's timing. There's a lesson there. Sometimes God says yes, right, to our requests and our prayers. Sometimes God says no, which we don't like to hear. And sometimes it is maybe later. And none of us want to hear that either. You know, I remember when my kids would want something, I'd say, no, not yet. You're not ready for that. Oh, come on, Dad. You're not ready for that. I've actually lived long enough, they've lived long enough to say thank you. I wasn't ready for that. Kinda, they've said that. Now I get to watch my daughters do stuff with my grandchildren, some of which I want to already do for them. No, come on. I still remember something, one of my grandsons did something, and I was, oh, it's okay. And, you know, they spilled something or whatever. I just cleaned it up. It's okay. This stuff happens. And my daughter looked at me like, who are you? Where were you when I was that age? You get upset. Well, because you ruined stuff. He didn't ruin it. And he's my grandson. All right. So we don't know how long Joseph's been in the prison. We just know he's there. He's running the place. But we do have a time element here. Ooh, we're not going to get it all done. We're just not. I'll just start it. And then we'll leave a cliffhanger for 2 weeks. After 2 whole years, Pharaoh dreamed that he was standing by the Nile. And there came up out of the Nile 7 sleek and fat cows, and they grazed in the reed grass. Then 7 other cows, ugly and thin, came up out of the Nile after them and stood by the other cows on the bank of the Nile. Okay, I have a question. What's an ugly cow? Florida cow. Oh, don't pick on my state. No, they get enough grass. They fatten them up too. But I just how does a cow know whether it's sleek and fat or ugly and skinny or thin? It's a cow. A cow's a cow. But for the interpretation of this dream, that's what Pharaoh sees. Now, I'm not trying to kill time, but why? No. What's important about the Nile? See, I have had an ancient history class, and so you have different perspectives, and not about Moses at this point, because Moses is still years away. What it is Mesopotamia, which is where the Garden of Eden was, and what we would call the Middle East or Palestine or any of that kind of area. The weather patterns were really rough. In Galilee, right, the Sea of Galilee, storms come up like that. You have the stuff from the Mediterranean, the pressure systems that come up, violent storms, earthquakes, all of that kind of stuff. But you also have desert, the Negev, all about, we think of Egypt, we think of sand. Well, there's sand, but you have the southern part of the Palestine area, it's called the Negev. And it is desolate. It's desert. And so you have that kind of mentality that's raised there. That's how the people are. Let me tell you how the Nile works and how Egypt works. The Nile would flood every year at the same time. And the Egyptians would know it was going to flood, and they would back up from it. And when it would flood, it would deposit topsoil along the banks of the Nile. So the flood comes, then the flood waters recede, and then you planted crops. And then the crops grew with very little effort. And then you would harvest the crops and you'd store it. And then the whole cycle would begin again. And so you have the Egyptians who grow up with, they form this worldview that says, oh, there's a little bit of flooding, but it's okay. It helps us. And their religion comes like this too. It just sort of grows, they do their stuff and they worship cats. Now, I have not figured that one out. But they worshiped cats and animals, and they did all of that. And then they did the mummification and some of these things. And they got all these different strange kind of views. Different from ours. But it's a different kind of way. The water comes up. It deposits soil, good soil, topsoil, because the topsoil is what the flood wipes away. And so the Nile does this every year on a regular basis. And you plant. After the water goes down, you plant, you reap those harvests. You might get another season in, and then you got to pull it in, and you store it, and then the flood comes year after year after year after year after year. So they're ready for it. So the Nile was central. And in fact, ancient Egypt, even somewhat modern Egypt, the towns grow up on the Nile. Because that's where you put the cities. That's how America grew. St. Louis, what's the river? The mighty Mississippi. New Orleans, what's the river? The Mississippi. You've got along the Hudson River, New York, and all of those little towns that grow in. Everywhere you have rivers in the settling of our nation, that's where the towns are. And where's Pittsburgh? It's got 3 rivers. And, and all of that, right? This Philadelphia, the Schuylkill River, all of that stuff. You got all of those things. The Tennessee River, oh my goodness. Now, that one I cannot figure out either. We rented a place for Thanksgiving, and it was on the river. And they said fishing available, right? Bring your own equipment. There was no river. They had pulled the plug. They had drained it down. They do that for the winter. I'm like, what a rip. And we went and played golf. And the river was through the golf course, which you could walk out on the riverbed and get your ball if you missed. My son's like, can I go get that? No, it's muddy. Here's another ball. So that's kind of their attitude. So when the Pharaoh has a dream about the Nile and he doesn't understand it, panic. Verse 3, then 7 other cows, ugly and thin, came out of the Nile after them and stood by the other cows on the bank of the Nile. And we're going to see what these ugly and thin cows do. The ugly and thin cows ate up the 7 sleek and fat cows. And Pharaoh awoke. Can you imagine? He's scared. The 7 skinny, ugly cows ate the fat cows. I like the fat cows. I wonder if he dreamt of cows. We say count sheep to go to sleep. Maybe he was counting cows. Then he fell asleep and dreamed a second time. 7 ears of grain, plump and good, were growing on one stalk. Then 7 ears thin and blighted by the east wind sprouted after them. The thin ears swallowed up the 7 plump and full ears. Pharaoh awoke, and it was a dream. He's unsettled. In the morning, his spirit was troubled. Yeah, because he's dreaming about food, and it's turning bad. So he sent and called for all the magicians of Egypt, and they had a bunch of them, and all its wise men. Pharaoh told them his dreams, but there was no one who could interpret them to Pharaoh. He's striking out all over the place. Then the chief cupbearer said to Pharaoh, I remember my faults today. This is a Oops, or as younger people say today, my bad. Okay? Here's his my bad. Once Pharaoh was angry with his servants and put me and the chief baker in custody of the house of the captain of the guard. We dreamed on the same night, he and I, each having a dream with its own meaning. A young Hebrew was there with us, a servant of the captain of the guard. When we told him, he interpreted our dreams to us, giving us an interpretation to each according to his dream. As he interpreted to us, so it turned out. I was restored to my office, and the baker was hanged. Of course, Joseph said, your head's going to be separated. But the way they hung, they didn't just break the neck. They could have taken the head off of the body. It wasn't an exact science then. They're still experimenting. Then Pharaoh sent for Joseph, and he was hurriedly brought out of the dungeon. When he had shaved himself and changed his clothes, he came in before Pharaoh. Egyptian men did not have beards. The only person who had a beard was Pharaoh. And sometimes they were false beards. And we even have a story of, I think, one of the women who acted as Pharaoh for one of her sons. She was a regent. She wore a false beard in order to order them around. She wasn't a cross-dresser, okay, like we see today. It was just to kind of make something happen, to have authority. Ooh, we're at 2:01. I got to get you through this. So Pharaoh sends for him. Joseph shaves. He gets cleaned up. And Pharaoh said to Joseph, I have had a dream, and there is no one who can interpret it. I have heard it said of you that when you hear a dream, you can interpret it. Joseph answered Pharaoh, it is not I. God will give Pharaoh a favorable answer. Then Pharaoh said to Joseph, in my dream I was standing on the banks of the Nile, and 7 cows, fat and sleek, came out of the Nile and fed on the reed grass. Then 7 other cows came up after them, poor, very ugly and thin. Now they're poor, by the way. You notice that? He's embellished it a little. When the thin and ugly cows ate up the first 7 fat cows, but when they had eaten them up, no one would have known that they had done so, for they were still as ugly as before, meaning and thin. Then I awoke, I fell asleep a second time, and I saw in my dream 7 ears of grain, full and good, growing on one stalk, and 7 ears withered, thin, and blighted by the east wind sprouting after them, and the thin ears swallowed up the 7 good ears. Now here's my question. Did the ears of corn have mouths? They swallowed it up somehow. But when I told it to the magicians, there was no one who could explain it to me. Then Joseph said to Pharaoh, Pharaoh's dreams are one and the same, meaning you've dreamt the same thing, just in a different way. God has revealed to Pharaoh what he is about to do. The 7 good cows are 7 years, and the 7 good ears are 7 years. The dreams are one. The 7 lean and ugly cows that came up after them are 7 years, as are the 7 empty ears blighted by the east wind. They are 7 years of famine. It is as I told Pharaoh. God has shown to Pharaoh what he is about to do. There will come 7 years of great plenty throughout all the land of Egypt. After them, there will arise 7 years of famine, and all the plenty will be forgotten in the land of Egypt. The famine will consume the land. The plenty will no longer be known in the land because of the famine that will follow, for it will be very grievous. And the doubling of Pharaoh's dream means that the thing is fixed by God, and God will shortly bring it about. Now therefore, let Pharaoh select a man who is discerning and wise and set him over the land of Egypt. Let Pharaoh proceed to appoint overseers over the land and take 1/5 of the produce of the land of Egypt during the 7 plenteous years. Let them gather all the food of these good years that are coming, and lay up grain under the authority of Pharaoh for food in the cities, and let them keep it. That food shall be a reserve for the land against the 7 years of famine that are to befall the land of Egypt, so that the land may not perish through the famine. All right, so 7 good years, 7 bad years, 14 years total. The doubling of the dream, meaning 7 good big cows, nice cows, 7 good years, that's reinforcing. God is saying, you better get going on this. You're going to have these 7 good years. The 7 ugly cows and the 7 years of blight, and then the ears of corn that are blighted, those also mean 7 bad years. So it's this 14-year span. And then Joseph tells Pharaoh, you better appoint somebody to oversee this because this is going to be a big deal. And now, I will tell you that some people thought originally, before we got inside of them, they thought the pyramids were Joseph's storage for the grain, which makes no sense because these pyramids took decades to build. So we're not sure what he did or how he did it, but he stored the grain. They stored the grain, moved it in. Now, in a desert area, you can actually store things that you wouldn't think you could store. Melba and I have been to Israel. Did you go to Masada? Okay, do you remember what they found on Masada when they excavated it? They found food that was stored that was still edible. And they found this in like the 1980s, I think it was, 1990s. And they said it was still viable. You could still use it, but it's because of it's so dry. Yeah. It's not freezer packed. C rations or K rations or whatever, right? Yeah, well, we know it. All the different letters have different meanings. Military people know it. It had to do with the years it was stored and all that kind of stuff. Now they call it MREs or MRIs. MRIs? E. Meals ready to eat. Yeah, he would know too. Yes. So, and I know that we got some of those after one of the hurricanes, and I had some people, we gave them to them. They're like, I don't want this. This is military stuff. I ate that in Iraq. Sorry, it's free. You don't want it? Here, we'll give it to somebody else who does. That's where I turned into my father of, you'll sit there and eat it until you want it. You get hungry enough, you'll eat almost anything. That's what my dad used to say. This coming from the same man who my grandmother told me stories that when he was a kid, she'd say, you need to eat that. And then my grandmother would say, there's starving kids in Europe or in China. And he'd say, pack it up, send it to them, because I don't want it. So we'll leave you with that cliffhanger as to what's going to happen. You kind of know Joseph's going to be the guy put in charge. But then it's going to really be wild, because the famine is not just a famine in Egypt. It is a famine everywhere. It is a worldwide famine. So we're not meeting next week. We will meet 2 weeks from today. I'm very excited to see my son and my future daughter-in-law. She's very nice. She's tall. We don't know how much they're going to be around church, because they won't be here when we have a church service. Are there any prayer requests or anything that we need to look before the Lord as we part? And thank you for staying with us. Thank you, Bob, for going over. All right, let's pray. Yes, I have, and I'll tell you about that afterwards. Let's pray. Gracious God, we thank you. We praise you for this day. We thank you for the story of Joseph, which is a story of your persistent love, watching over him. We don't know how many years he was with Potiphar or how many years in the prison, except for the 2 when the cupbearer forgot him. But we know, O God, that you are watching over him, just as you promised to watch over us. And we give you thanks and we praise you for your presence with us. We give you We give you our hearts, O Lord. As we enter this season of Lent, we ask, O Lord, that you would be with us, that we would practice those practices that draw us closer to you, whether it be prayer or giving of alms or of sacrificing. We just pray, O God, that you would draw us closer to you, we pray. For we ask these things in the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Amen. I want to remind all of you here and all of you online, that God loves you, this church loves you, and I love you as your pastor. And we'll see you on Thursday for the Daily Word. Thank you. Bye now.